Do you remember this moment on the referendum night 2 years ago?
My sense of this, and no, I'm not conceding, but my sense of this is that the government's registration scheme, getting 2 million voters on, the 48-hour extension, may be what tips the balance. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I made a fool of, believing that to be the case.
Now, that was Nigel Farage there, speaking before any of the results had come in. That was one of several statements he made that evening, repeating his view that he thought Remain had probably won. Now, a report by Bloomberg has alleged that the former UKIP leader had inside information and in fact thought that Leave would win. Well, Nigel Farage joins us now to clear this up. The accusation, as I'm sure you know, I'm sure you've read the article in detail, is that you believe Leave had a good chance of winning, but you continued to say that you thought that Remain had edged it because that was pushing up the pound and that a lot of people made a lot of money when the pound rallied and then suddenly crashed when we saw the results come in.
Well, let's get perspective on this. The pound had rallied significantly before the Brexit vote. After the polls closed at 10 p.m, I said I wasn't sure about the result, and genuinely I wasn't. The pound didn't move on what I said. Where the pound did move was when YouGov came out and said their exit poll showed it was 52-48 that Remain had won. The pound rallied a little bit after that, and then, once the Sunderland result came out, the pound fell like a stone because all the short-term speculators were long on the pound. So the idea that I was part of some extraordinary conspiracy trying to prop up the value of the pound so that we could sell it short, and that all the hedge funds cleaned up when actually most of them lost money, the whole thing is just too fantastical for anyone to believe.
Well, one of the quotes from you on the night that Bloomberg have picked up on is you say, "I know from some of my friends in the financial markets who've done some big polling," was what you were basing your assessments on. So you were speaking to people who'd paid for private polls on the night.
There was all sorts of information coming in to me. A lot of people saying they thought Remain had won. Two major sources telling me that they thought that Leave had won, including Aaron Banks, who'd done his own 10,000 voter poll. I was in one of those positions. I didn't know what to think. I wasn't sure. There's nothing unusual in that at all.
Let's take a quick look at a picture of you on the night, which we can bring up on the screen now. You won't be able to see it, but you're in front of a terminal looking at a graph of what's been happening to the pound as the Leave results are coming in. You look very gleeful in that. Are you celebrating the fact that the pound had crashed?
Oh, it's a very good thing the pound was going down. Of course it was, but that's not the point. I was laughing that all the experts had got it wrong, because basically the YouGovs, the big companies, all said that Remain would win. All the financial institutions thought that Remain would win. I thought it was very funny that all of those in the establishment were actually now having a tough time with their speculative positions on the pound.
Now, you're a former trader. You understand all of these complicated speculative positions. Did you make any money out of the result?
No, I had no financial interest in the currency moves on that day. The only bet on Brexit I had was £1,000 on my nose for Leave to win, which I did in the Ladbroke shop that was photographed. I had no other financial interest on that evening whatsoever.
But there were people who did make a lot of money out of the fact that the pound rose when we thought that the result was going to be Remain and then suddenly crash. I mean, you say some people lost money because they bet the wrong way, but there were people who made large sums of money. Because whenever you see a currency movement that huge, and it was the biggest crash the pound had done in generations, there is money to be made from people who've shorted it.
Yes, of course there is, but just be very clear that when we talk about the hedge fund industry, at least 3/4 of them were long of sterling and lost money. There were a couple that made money on the downside, but those positions were put on over the course of days or weeks, not short-term punts taken between 10 o'clock and midnight when the Sunderland result came out. You know, the markets just don't work like that.
I'm sure you've seen there are new reports in the press this morning about your friend Aaron Banks' links to various Russian businesses, that he met with several more of them during the referendum campaign than had previously been reported. What do you make of this?
Aaron Banks is in the mining industry. He has diamond mines. It is unsurprising in the small world of mining that lots of people talk to each other because you know what? They're all looking for investors. Every mine in the world is looking for investors. And some proposals were put to Mr. Banks, none of which resulted in any investment, any money changing hands whatsoever. I'm struggling a bit to see what the story is.
But there's now reports the National Crime Agency may get involved in investigating this.
Oh, of course, and why not? But this is what happens, isn't it? This is exactly what happens. Those that wish to cause trouble report you to the police, or report, in my case, me to Olaf in Brussels, and then give the story to a newspaper. It's the classic tactic that is being used. Look, there is no evidence that Mr. Banks has done anything wrong. It may not have been very wise to go and have a boozy lunch with the Russian ambassador, although at the time the Russians weren't quite seen to be the devils and demons that they are now. But there is no evidence of any wrongdoing at all. And I find just this whole world of endless accusations being made without any proof quite extraordinary.
You, like the rest of us, will be eagerly waiting to see what comes out of the Chequers meeting on Friday, where the Cabinet's supposed to finally agree its position on Brexit. Do you have any optimism that they will come out with something that will satisfy your desires for Brexit?
To be honest with you, it's clear that Brexit voters voted for us to leave the single market, to take back control of our borders, and not to be governed by a foreign court. I mean, those things are perfectly clear. All the leading players on both sides in the debate set that out. The Prime Minister is clearly not intending to deliver on these things, at least not in the foreseeable future of the next few years. It is a big sellout, some would even say betrayal, of what Brexit voters expected. But I kind of think, sitting here right now, that she's got a stronger hand of cards than the Eurosceptics have got. Because what the Eurosceptics, the genuine Eurosceptics in Cabinet, have to decide is, are they either going to A, walk away, resign, or B, try and force her out as leader? And there are many Brexiteers who think this Prime Minister, frankly, since her Lancaster House speech, has let us all down shockingly.
All right, Mr. Farage, we'll have to leave it there. We're out of time.
2.5 minutes.
Thank you. As Mr Moscovici said at the start of this, the leak of all these papers and lists of people with offshore holdings has come about because of the Society of Investigative Journalists. But what's not been said this morning, and I think is relevant, is that the funding of these investigations came from one George Soros. Now, I say this at a time, I'm going to come back to so what, and it may have some personal interest for you as well. I say this at a time when the use of money and the influence it may have had on the Brexit result or the Trump election has reached a level of virtual hysteria. Just last week, the Electoral Commission in the UK launched an investigation to find out whether the Leave campaign took offshore money or Russian money. This came about as a result of questions asked in the House of Commons by one Ben Bradshaw, somebody linked to an organisation called Open Society. I just wonder, when we're talking about offshore money, when we're talking about political subversion, when we're talking about collusion, I wonder whether we're looking in the wrong place. And I say that because George Soros recently gave Open Society, his organisation, which of course campaigns for free movement of peoples and supports supranational structures like the European Union, he recently gave it $18 billion. And his influence here and in Brussels is truly extraordinary. Open Society boast that they had 42 meetings last year with the European Commission. They've even published a book of reliable friends in the European Parliament, and there are 226 names on that list, including yours, sir. I thought you'd find this interesting. We even had last week Mr Verhofstadt lobbying on behalf of Mr Soros at the Conference of Presidents in a battle that is going on with Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary. If we're going to have a debate and we're going to talk about full political and financial transparency, well, let's do it. So I should be writing today to all 226 of you, asking some pretty fair questions. Have you ever received funds, directly or indirectly, from Open Society? How many of their events have you attended? Could you please give us a list of the meetings of all the representatives, including George Soros yourself, and I think this Parliament should now set up a special committee to look into all of this. And I say that because I fear we could be looking at the biggest level of international political collusion in history.
Mr Farage, there's a question from Madam Regner. Will you accept? Yes. Please put the question. 30 seconds.
Thank you. You are diverting from the subject. We are discussing the subject of the Paradise Papers here. Are you in favour of the fact that in the British Virgin Islands and other tax havens there are tax structures that remain permissible? Yes or no?
If you're going to completely ban people from putting money, which in many cases could be utterly legitimate investments, be it in the British Virgin Islands or the Bahamas or anywhere else, if you're going to do that, then please be consistent. Make sure that you ban the sale of duty-free cigarettes. Make sure that you stop anyone using their personal allowances to avoid tax when it comes to investments. Oh, and by the way, while you're at it, what about the 25,000 people that work for the European Commission and